All right, House Huddlers. Today's episode is a little different, and honestly, it's one I am very excited to bring you. I do want to apologize. My voice is acting up from being at the game. Unfortunately, didn't go as we wanted, but you got to move on, got to move into the future. And something that, this podcast has been very, very upfront about is the Chicago Bears stadium situation, specifically the property tax situation. So joining us today is Mark Batinick, a former member of the Illinois House of Representatives who served from 2015 to 2023, including 4 years as House Republican floor leader. During his time in Springfield, he wasn't just casting votes. He was in the room for real negotiations, coalition building, and the behind-the-scenes mechanics of how big policy actually gets done in Illinois. Outside of politics, Mark has spent over 30 years in commercial real estate, working directly with large-scale development, land use, infrastructure financing, and property tax policy, which makes him uniquely qualified to break down the Bears Stadium situation without the spin. Since leaving office, he's advised candidates and elected officials across the state and currently serves as an advisor to the Illinois Policy Institute. Mark recently authored a detailed white paper laying out why the Bears Stadium future isn't being blocked by money or ambition, but tax structure, politics, and timing. I have talked about the Chicago Bears Stadium situation from a property tax perspective on multiple occasions on this show, but I'm excited to dig into it with someone who has not only real estate and property tax experience, but also can give us an Illinois lawmaker perspective. Mark, welcome to the House Huddle. I appreciate you huddling up with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Excited to talk about this.
Yeah, we're going to dive right in. Your white paper, it's 15 pages. I will say there's going to be a link to that in the description of this podcast. So if you listeners want to go and check that out, read that in its entirety, please do so. It is very, very informative. Mark, we'll start with this. You say the stadium debate isn't emotional or ideological. It's arithmetic. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean a couple of different things. One on the political side, but then also on the on just the math side of the financing. So in the white paper, and it's kind of come out now the last couple of days since I released it. Um, the property tax angle for a stadium is incredibly unique. Most of the stadiums across the country seem to be state owned. And when something's owned by the government, you pay a 0% property tax bill. But something that's unique to Illinois, specifically Cook County, is Cook County has a two-tier property tax system. And people don't realize that we have high property taxes versus the nation in Illinois. But a commercial property in Cook County pays 2.5 times what a residential property of that same value would pay, further increasing it. So the math of it is simply this: the highest stadium property tax bill I was able to find was SoFi Stadium. My data had to come in at 8.1. That was a couple of years old. As other reporters have dug into this, I think it's up to like 8.8, but right in that range there. If you were to use a regular property tax bill and not do any sort of negotiations with Springfield and local government, commercial properties in Cook County, specifically Arlington Heights, are taxed at a rate near 7% of the market value, not the assessed value, but the market value. That would put the cost of a property tax bill for a stadium that's $3 billion at the $210 million a year range. So to break down further math, if you were to do a 70,000 seat stadium, that would be $3,000 a year per seat you would have to pay just in property taxes for that stadium. Without any sort of negotiation, a stadium being built in Cook County is simply impossible.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the story, how Mark and I actually connected was on Twitter, and he had Jacob Infante had sent or tweeted out his white paper, and I was reading through just the initial part of it as I was on the train headed to the city, and I was like, "There's just no way." And like I ran the math on my phone, and I'm like, "No, this is not what it's coming out to be." But I doubled the 25% level of assessment on both the actual value of the property, and then I did it again in the tax rate, and you can't do that, right? So like you're saying 7%, that's off the market value, not off the assessed value. And even me, someone who's been doing this for 10 years, I think about 6 within the Cook County area, you can still mess this up because the number just seems unreasonable.
Yeah, it seems unreasonable. I think the property tax system is opaque for a reason. Just the whole way it's set up. The rest of the state is your assessed value is supposed to be a third of market value. So if you have if your tax rate is 6%, you're paying 6% on assessed value. I don't know why we just don't do market value every year and just pay a certain amount on market value so everybody can understand it. But there might be a reason for that. I haven't figured it out. But that's one of the things. It's such a confusing thing, specifically in Cook County, that wasn't part of the conversation and really needed to be, because it like I said, it's a physical impossibility to have the stadium be economically viable with that sort of property tax rate. And when you look at the stadiums in Illinois, you have Guaranteed Rate, which is owned by the state technically. You have Soldier Field, which is owned by the government. You have Wrigley, and people have reached out to me. One of the reasons why Wrigley has a lower property tax rate is because of some sort of landmark status. And then, interestingly enough, you have the stadium, which pays the highest, the United Center, where the stadium was, pays the highest property tax bill in the state that I could find. I think they're a little bit over 6 million, a little bit closer to kind of market for a building that size. But they even had a negotiated, long-term, agreed upon property tax bill. So there's the government has been involved one way or another in every stadium deal when it comes to property taxes in Illinois.
Yes. So I just got to ask, like, why did you feel the need to write this paper now? Like, what was missing from that public conversation?
Yeah, there was three things that were missing from the conversation, and personally for me, one of the reporters I had talked to kind of brought it up after we spoke. I am kind of uniquely positioned. Just the experience that I've gone through, both politically and personally, kind of put me to understand a lot of the different parts of this. And one of them is I grew up on the Indiana border. I could ride my bike to Indiana. I've seen businesses leave my hometown of Lansing to go to Indiana, so I know a lot about the property tax differences just from that personal standpoint. The property tax discussion was not part of the conversation. Another thing that's been missing from the conversation is we've been burned with stadiums in Illinois because we didn't do them right. I want to make something very clear. I was not an elected official in any way, shape, or form. I would go to an occasional local meeting. The day the renovation passed for the current stadium for Soldier Field, I was livid. I happened to run into my state senator that night, and I kind of gave him an earful because I knew it was bad economics. But done right, a stadium actually can be an economic boom for our community. And you look at AT&T Stadium down in Arlington, Texas. you know, Arlington paid for part of that stadium, and the Bears aren't even asking for anybody to pay for part of that
Right.
stadium. And they've done very well. They've done very well with that stadium. The last thing is, I'm a little bit disappointed in the Bears not understanding the politics of how things work. That's math as well. You need 60 votes in the House to pass something, 30 in the Senate, and then you're going to need the governor to sign it. So it's a term we use all the time: 60, 30, and 1. Well, you have 40 Republicans in the House that have no reason to vote for something like this, especially if it's viewed as a bailout for billionaires. And then you have 20 reps that represent the city of Chicago that have no reason to vote for this. So you're already at the 60 threshold for no. Then you toss in some downstate Democrats, and it gets to be very difficult for the Bears to get the vote that they need in order to get something like this passed. So they clearly did a bad job of understanding the politics of it, and that's why I wanted to explain a little bit, even to the Bears, but also to the public, what you need to do to get something like this passed.
Yeah. We'll touch a little bit more on that, I think, as we go on in this conversation. But going back to that $210 million number, right? When fans hear 200 plus million a year in property taxes, it sounds insane, even for the billionaire owners of the McCaskies, which we've touched on. And you mentioned the boom, right? On this show, I dove into like what has taken place in Inglewood with the SoFi Stadium and what
Mhm.
that community has seen. They were on the verge of actually like going bankrupt as a town, as a city, and they were able to just completely turn that around. I think it was like 17% in unemployment. I mean, it was really, really down, and things have completely turned it around. So again, if we met on Twitter, but can you just kind of you kind of touched on it already with the two-tier system. I just maybe let me expand on this, and I'll throw the question to you. I ran the numbers on if the Chicago Bears were to have this valued at that 10% level of assessment, right? Versus the
Mhm.
25%, right? And for people who are out there that don't understand, there are incentives that Cook County can do. And I'm surprised that there isn't a classification specifically for stadiums at this point, but maybe that's something that they need to look at doing over the next few years in order to get this, or over the next few months in order to get this locked in. But the difference would be what, 200 million? I think it was 14 million if you ran it at that 10%. So it's a huge difference. And can you just kind of explain how, this is a deal breaker for something, this type of development here in the city or outside the city in Cook County?
Yeah, it's a deal breaker, but the thing that you talk about, it's also a deal breaker. I know this is a sports show, but this is why large scale businesses have left Cook County. So by large scale, what I mean is a large real estate footprint. So that two-tier system can kind of work when you have an office building. You might have 20 people working in a few thousand square feet. Well, when you have a warehouse or manufacturing, that really gets that doesn't work. So the two-tier system, I'll give you an example where it's been detrimental, is places like what I said, where I grew up in Lansing. I have a buddy that owns a little warehouse facility, and he works on cars there. He's been trying to sell it for 350. He had a deal somewhere in the low 300,000 range, and it fell apart over the property tax bill. After he appealed his assessment, it was $60,000 a year of an assessment. Now, and that's where it gets exacerbated in some of the suburbs. I think your commercial property tax on the two-tier system in the city, like the Sears Tower, Willis Tower, whatever you want to call it, is valued at market price of a billion with a I think their tax at the effective rate is about 5%. But
Mm-hmm.
that's the issue that's hurting the Bears is exacerbated for two reasons. One, it's a large footprint, right? A stadium takes up a whole bunch of space, and it's not like there's thousands of employees going there every day to work where it's just part of a big machine. It's a situation where it's going to be used for hopefully more than 10 dates a year, maybe 20, 30 dates a year when you can toss in some other events, but it still is only being used for a fraction of the time. And that's why that two-tier system is doubly bad for a stadium.
All right. Well, yeah, that completely understand, and hopefully the listeners do too. Um, you had already touched on this. You point out other NFL stadiums, including Soldier Field, they don't pay anything close to this. So why is that comparison so important? I mean, 200 million to 8.8 million. I mean, this is like, I don't see how fans cannot be upset about it.
Yeah, and that's once again that's what got me frustrated with the Bears doing a bad job of marketing this. One of the things that I think a lot of people, one of the things that I learned, and a lot of people back home aren't really aware of, is that the politicians aren't going to do something they're going to be less likely to do something that goes against the public. What the public conversation is, right? So sometimes if you want to get something passed, it's important to talk to people within the halls of government, but it's also, especially with something like this, important to talk to people outside of government, because everybody seems to have an opinion on the Bear Stadium. And we've even seen in the last week, as this data has come out, I was on ABC, GN, Trib, Daily Herald. I had a whole host of people around the conversation contact me. As you've seen this come out, the public opinion has shifted, and so has the governor, and so has kind of the talk on it. At the beginning of the week, it was like, we're not paying for anything. Then it was like, well, we'll do infrastructure, and then but they have to pay off the Bears debt from the old Soldier Field. Then they're like, well, no, that's really not their debt. They've quickly moved because they realized that public opinion has moved. So it's important for the Bears to move public opinion, and I don't think they've done a good enough job on that, specifically with the property taxes. Sports Mockery did an article on it, I think yesterday, came out, and I saw a couple comments, talk about billionaires paying their fair share. Well, we do polling as well. I do some work in politics right now. We do polling, and if I were to poll people and say, hey, this is what other stadiums pay, how much do you think the Bears should pay in property tax? Nobody would say they should pay 210 or even 100 million a year in property taxes, right? When the highest is 8 million in 8.8 now, I believe, for SoFi Stadium. So that's why having that out there is really important. One, just because the math doesn't, it just won't happen. And then two, the public needs to understand that the Bears they're offering a much better deal than what we did 25 years ago. A much better deal. I mean, they paid, my understanding was like a little bit over 600 million a year. Bears chipped in 100, the NFL chipped in 100. So they did 200 million, and then the city was on the hook for the rest. City and state were on the hook for the rest. They're talking about paying for the entire stadium this time, which wasn't done in Arlington, which often is not done. And we should applaud organizations that are willing to pay for their entire stadium, instead of belittling them.
Yeah, I think even the Kansas City Chiefs, the Hunts, I don't think they're paying for their stadium now that they're going to Kansas and leaving Missouri. So we're kind of in a similar situation here with the Chicago-Indiana border. But I think you touched on it, and I think it's a good segue, is something I think too many Chicago Bears fans and even Illinois residents themselves don't understand is the Bears are already paying millions on the Arlington Heights property. Like, that is generating literally right now zero revenue. It's literally just vacant land because they've torn everything down. I will say that Pritzker did shift through appeals. They did get that mostly. There's one piece of property that's still a class 597, I believe. But most of it has now shifted to a 10% level of assessment versus the 25. But to your point, like, I think it's fair. The McCaskies, Kevin Warren, the Bears organization, they're just looking for something reasonable. They're looking for reasonable tax certainty. They're not looking to escape property taxes. So that goes against the billionaires need to pay their fair share. There's no secret. As someone who is a property tax consultant or used to be, I have no love loss for Pritzker. And I outlined this in the beginning. I did listen to an interview that you did recently on WMA News. And you didn't give him as much blame. I do. So we'll agree to disagree there, because I still think he chased a sale that had not fully closed in a year that wasn't actually part of the reassessment year. But again, I've covered that verbatim on the show, so we don't need to go into that. But going back to the property, and it's a surprising point that you make, and again, I've made on the show, is they're already collecting more from the Bears now than when Arlington Park was actually operating as a business. So can you just kind of briefly touch on that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you covered that other part previously on your on one of the podcasts. And I think there's probably room to say we're both right, or I agree with a lot of what you say. Maybe Fritz got ahead of the curve a little bit, but it should be a commercial development, its own commercial. If your tax rate is 200 million and you're in a 7% off a market rate, 14 million would be the tax bill. This is part of the games that I don't like. Once again, on the political side, I think this is what's hurt business in Cook County. A lot of people don't want to invest in Cook County. This is a perfect example. People don't want to invest in Cook County because they got to jump through all these hoops just to do something remotely reasonable. So I think you're right about if it wasn't a non-valuation year, but eventually, whether it comes to an evaluation year, eventually once that land is looked at as being all commercial, you would have still a high property tax bill. But yeah, they're paying 3.6 million, and I think it was about 3 million a year they were paying under Arlington
Downs.
Park. So yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy that they're paying more than when it was an open facility, and they're still kind of getting berated. And look, I mean, I've got plenty of criticism for the Bears. It's not like I wrote this because I think the Bears are angels and everything. I look at what they did, 25 years ago, and that was a really bad deal. But
It's
yeah,
an awful deal.
yeah, it was an awful deal. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit later. And I said it at the time, it was an awful deal. But just because you did an awful deal before doesn't mean you do no deal this time. And part of why I wanted to write the papers, I want a world-class stadium in Chicagoland, and I want it to be a good deal, not a bad deal.
Yeah, and for those of you, listening along, look, we're going to touch on how Mark thinks that could still be a possibility even with the Indiana situation. So we'll get to that later. But right now, and I think this is something that I can't speak to, but I think you have this unique experience, and this is why I wanted you to come on the show. right now that Arlington site produces no jobs, no sales tax, no hotel tax, nothing, right? And they're supposed to be building this huge mixed use development. But why does that matter for local governments?
Man, it's a whole bunch of revenue. I mean, specifically for the school districts, but also for the county and local government. That's a lot of look. They're already getting more money in property taxes. You build a $3 billion stadium. I can tell you that we're probably going to land with the highest property tax bill in the nation. But you're also going to get a rebound effect off of that, right? A ripple effect, I should say, where you're going to have growth off of that growth, whether it be other restaurants and bars that are going to be paying that full 7% in property taxes, and people coming to that area and spending money. I mean, that's huge dollars. You know, you talked about. Have not looked at Inglewood. I probably should. I've spent a little bit more time in looking at what's happening in Arlington, Texas, because I was there recently. They paid their stadium off early. They did it right in Arlington, and they paid their stadium debt off early. They're so flush with cash in Arlington, they've been able to make it work where they have this beautiful Texas Rangers stadium that's relatively new, and they said, we need a roof because it's too hot during the dog days of summer, and they built another new wonderful retractable dome stadium right next to it, which then is right next to AT&T Stadium. So when you do these things right, they can generate a lot of cash.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another stadium that you've compared a lot to Soldier Field was Lucas Oil Stadium, right? So why is that comparison still relevant 20 years later?
Yeah, this is probably the whole genesis of everything. So when I was first running for office, I put a lot of content out there, and one of them was the comparison of Soldier Field versus Lucas Oil Field, which were built about I believe about a year apart. And I used it as an example of Illinois. It's not that Illinois doesn't spend enough or tax enough; it's that we don't necessarily make the best decisions or right investment. Lucas Oil Field was built for just a little bit more than Soldier Field, but it's a retractable dome. So what does that mean when you're a retractable dome? Um, they got a Super Bowl. And they don't. I was looking for the report. They don't have it up anymore. But they did a study. I believe it was the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce did a study, and the net economic impact of one Super Bowl was over $300 million in Indianapolis. So what they did is they didn't say, okay, this is how much money was spent. They said, how much is usually spent that weekend in January or February at the time, and then what's the hotel rate, and then what was the difference in having everybody there for those days. So the net impact paid for half of the stadium. So then you toss in, they've had at least two Final Fours, which it generates, you see estimates of 90, $100 million for a Final Four. But I even get frustrated the fact that the Big Ten championships are in Indianapolis instead of being in Chicago. Bands of America that my daughter would go to would be in Indianapolis instead of in Chicago. There's just a lot of large scale national events. Well, here's the most recent one. We don't have a World Cup. And I challenge all your sports loving viewers to go look at Kansas City and see how much the cheapest ticket is on StubHub for a World Cup event. There you go. I think it's $2,000 a seat. Now imagine if someone's going to fly around the world to go to a World Cup game, or at least around the country, and drop $2,000 on a seat for one game. Imagine what they're spending at hotels and tourism dollars and food and all that other stuff. So there are studies that talk about, when the Cubs are in the playoffs, the economic boom, that's just shifting dollars, right? People are going to a bar and watching the Cubs game instead of maybe just going to a restaurant with their girlfriend or whatever. Um, you want to bring in events that bring in new dollars. That's the true fiscal economic impact. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Lucas Oil Field has paid for itself, or Lucas Oil Stadium has paid for itself, when you really look at the number of events that they have that they wouldn't have had if they didn't have the facility. Plus, here it is 20 years later, and they've got what is, a really good stadium still. Whereas we're looking to, move on to something else.
Yeah, and they're losing the Chicago Fire here at Soldier Field too. So I mean, it's going to just be a giant empty stadium that they're not going to be able to do much with outside of the warm months of the summer. Just you touched on it enough. I don't think I need to ask the next question, but I think it's important to point out that money that shows up from those events, it's not just like going to the Colts. It's not going to the billionaires. That's going to those local businesses, right? Or even the hotels. Like, it's going to the restaurants, the ride shares. There's so much that goes on, in those events that your everyday people are making money as well. So I mean, it's very important, I think, to emphasize that as the Bears are trying to do something different than what they did 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's really a huge thing. And if I was in Springfield, I'd really be beating the drums for it, because you're talking about, yeah, there's small businesses, there's services, but then those people have money to pay rent, pay their mortgage, get something done on their house. I mean, you've talked about, you've actually piqued my interest a little bit with what's happened in Inglewood. That's the sort of economic impact that you want to see. And if you're going to be a world class city, you need a world class stadium, and those are the things that you talk about are some of the reasons.
Okay, so you touched on this a little bit, but we're going to get a little bit into the politics here. So, from your experience, why can't a stadium deal just pass on party line votes? Like, who did the Bears fail to give a reason to say yes? Republicans, Chicago Democrats, downstate lawmakers, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even that they don't have a majority. That I think they're kind of far from it in terms of giving a reason for people to vote yes. And there's plenty of reasons for people to vote no. Kind of the mantra around the country is don't give giveaways for billionaires. Giveaways for billionaires is bad, right? And as I said at the beginning, there's 40 Republicans in the House that have absolutely no reason to vote for this. A downstate Republican, even a suburban Republican, really has no reason to vote for this. But that other key is those 20 reps that are Democrats that represent part of the city of Chicago. That alone gets you up to 60. You toss in the some other downstate Democrats, and then just if you're a suburban Democrat nowhere near Arlington Heights, it's not going to get something that you see as specifically tied to this bill. It makes it really hard for a bill to pass. So the Bears have not thought about this globally and from a political standpoint, and they really need to.
Yeah, I'm curious as to, as someone who is not on the inside, and obviously you aren't either, but how much of this falls on George McCaskey and Ted Phillips making this deal, not getting enough information and knowing where things were going to go ahead of time during like the underwriting process versus early, and even early on lobbying before you even make the deal, versus Kevin Warren, who came in kind of after the project. But I think a lot of local fans, are putting a lot of blame on Kevin Warren. We won't know the answer, but it's just really interesting to think about who's at fault here, not making sure they understood the dynamics that were at play.
Yeah, to that, let me point out one thing before I forget. Specifically with Kevin Warren, he has been a little bit all over the board. We're going here, but no, now we're going to Chicago. Now we're going back to Arlington Heights. Now we're going to Indiana. It was not wise to stand with Mayor Johnson, who has a really low approval rating, kind of on his own, without understanding that Johnson needs help from Springfield to get this done. You can't
Yep.
you can't box out the people that actually do things and stand with Brandon Johnson and think that that's gonna bring you love from the rest of the state. So that was a key mistake. Kind of the way that he's the Indiana thing could have been handled differently. I think I would have been. It feels like it came out a little bit late and as a leverage play. They probably should have been open about talking about it early. And had you started this whole conversation, I wouldn't be surprised if there are a lot of people in House Hall that didn't understand the property tax implications and the need to get that out publicly. And had you started out by saying, "Look, here's the facts. Um, this is unworkable. We're going to look across the border because we have to look at all of our options if we're not going to be treated fairly by the state of Illinois." And that's how I would have couched it. And they didn't really go. They didn't really go in that direction. So there's probably a lot of blame to go around, but there's certainly some specific things that you would probably. I bet Kevin wishes that he can go back in time and change.
Yeah, as someone who's had experience with getting a stadium deal done in Minnesota, so you would think, I guess things just are different, from one politics to the next. But
I talk to a lot of legislators from around the country. I can tell you things are different in Illinois, and I know
yeah,
everybody has their own little differences. But this is just go back to the fact that I had a national it wasn't the tax foundation, although the tax foundation did recently write an article kind of confirming my 210, but it was a different advocacy group when I was in the state house, and the Senate leader had brought me in on a call, and they did not believe when I was telling them some of the property tax rates in Cook County. So those are things that are unique to Cook County that aren't in Minnesota and aren't in other parts of the country. And that, frankly, I think just a sliver of people in Illinois understand, let alone, somebody coming in new from out of state.
Yeah, from a state perspective, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we're the highest property tax rates in the country.
We just achieved that.
Yeah,
We used to be number two to New Jersey. But even with that, if you were to talk about commercial property tax rates, it's not even close, because that's the big difference. They're kind of looking at, I believe usually those comparisons are residential or overall, but Cook County with that two-tier system is something it's just totally unique to us.
real quick. So, do you think that Governor Pritzker's national profile and likely presidential run, changes the calculation here over the last year or two?
I think it hugely changes the calculation. It would be egg on his face if we lose it over to Indiana, especially when you look at the facts of the case. But at the same time, it's really a pretty easy decision, in my opinion, for him. Um, if he's able to get a stadium done, and the bar is the Bears pay the highest property tax bill in the nation, to me, that's what makes this a win for the governor running for president, because he could say, hey, I didn't do a giveaway to billionaires. They're paying the highest property tax bill out of any stadium in the nation, and we still got the stadium done, and it's going to be world class, and we can do it. The politics of that particular item really, really plays huge here, and I think it does play to the Bears' favor.
I think you just literally just laid it all out there, exactly what needs to happen. That to me is how you spin the narrative. That is how you spin it. Like, there's no reason to not go that route. That's a very simplistic way of thinking about it, but oh my gosh, like, it just boom opened up, your eyes. Like, as
Yeah.
you said that, it's like, yeah, that you're doing everything that you want to do from a political standpoint on that one. So
Yeah, if you look, I'll expand on that a little bit. They kept talking about, like, oh, this is insensitive of the Bears. We can't give tax breaks to the Bears. It's affordability. It's affordability. That's what their polling is showing. And I'm doing polling right now. I was on a polling call before I was on your call, and affordability is the big issue, which is why we need to bring economic growth and bring new development to help lower property taxes, which new development can do. I mean, if you're willing to explain things just a step or two and get some data out there, you can honestly say that this is a win for all parties.
I'm going to change gears a little bit. We're still talking politics, but you call the labor the quiet power broker. So why, first of all, and then what would labor need to see for this project to move?
Well, I think labor's we'll split that up a little bit. There's
Okay,
construction labor, and then there's the teachers union. I think the teachers union wanted the 210, but I think the teachers
of
union is
course.
going to be happy getting more than what they're getting now, and anybody kind of should. But yeah, the real power broker there is you're going to have interchanges, stoplights, all kinds of union trade jobs, and if you want somebody that has a lot of influence down in Springfield to twist arms to get people to vote yes so that a project like this moves, that's going to be the one. They're going to be the ones that are going to be saying, hey, Joe, you're a union guy. This is a big, big, big project for our electricians, concrete, and you name it. Um, they're going to be the ones that have the direct line to elected officials, giving them a reason to vote yes. And you have to get to that 60. They're really going to have they're going to be as influential. They're going to be more influential than the Bears, frankly. They're going to be extremely influential and getting to the 60, 30, and 1.
Is that something like the Bears and their representatives, their lobbyist groups, whatever, whoever they're using, can also use that as a negotiation tactic, like on the back end, like stuff that we're not seeing, like where they can partner with some of these people and, like, look, really push that, those jobs, the labor force.
Yeah, and they have,
Okay.
and I'm sure they have. It'd be shocking if they didn't, but yeah, that's definitely part of it. Once again, I just think that when the Bears have done a bad job with the publicity around this, and once you fix the publicity around this, I think the rest of it actually becomes fairly easy.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the Indiana situation. We're seeing a huge push, obviously, from Indiana to convince the Chicago Bears to move south. I'm on record stating that this is more than just a leverage play. Adam Hogue, which is a big insider within Chicago for the Chicago Bears, made it clear like George McCaskey would have had to sign off on that for the statement letter that came out from Kevin Warren about a month ago. But Indiana has proven over the last couple of months, even as recently as last week, just how serious they are in this situation. So first, do you agree with the sentiment that Indiana is a real threat with the plans that they have laid out? And second, do you think there is a path forward to keeping Chicago Bears in the state of Illinois? And what does that path look like?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the Indiana part first. I've seen it firsthand too often. There's been plenty of people that have had roots for way too long. Most of my family lives in Indiana now. My parents were just over last night for the game, and they drove back to Indiana this morning. And most of my high school graduating class resides across the border now in Indiana. So if you're gonna tell the Bears that they have no stability on property taxes, and it could be a bill that just makes it unworkable, you're basically putting the Bears in a situation where they have absolutely no option. They're going to have to. They're. I should say they have two options. They have Indiana or stay at the current Soldier Field. But if they're going to do a new stadium, they're going to need some assist from those in Springfield. I think what makes the Indiana thing hard. I saw Gary, I think, announced like three sites that they were looking at, and I had heard about a site across Wolf Lake. For those of you who don't know that what Wolf Lake is, there is an area of Chicago called the East Side. It's not the lake; it's actually a community. It's by Hegwish. And when I would go to Grandma's house, we drive by Wolf Lake, and on the other side of Wolf Lake was Indiana. If they could have a site there that's extremely close to downtown, and extremely close to the border, I think that's more viable. When you get one of the sites was pretty far in into Gary, I think that would be a stretch for the Bears to move that far. Not not solely because of the drive for the fans, and I know the majority of the fans or the plurality of the fans are from the northwest suburbs. But those big suites, the people that pay the big bucks for the suites, I don't think are going to want to be going too far from downtown Chicago in order to go to Indiana. But if you get it really close to that border, that's a very serious option. The farther the way you get from that border, I think the Bears would get a Super Bowl simply because the NFL would make it, part of the deal. I don't know if you get the Final Fours. I don't know if you get as many, Monster Jam, WWE events, some of the other huge events there. I think the farther into Indiana you go, that gets to be a little bit more limited just from a population standpoint. The path to keeping the Bears in Arlington Heights, I think, is relatively simple. One, give them stability on a property tax bill and make it so that it's higher than SoFi. That's what you need to do. I think you need to throw a token to the Chicago legislators regarding Soldier Field. You have to have some sort of plan on that. And I know that a couple of years ago, the McCaskies were like, that's not our problem. It is. They don't owe any of the debt. Everybody who's wondering, the reason there's a lot of debt on it is because Chicago kept refinancing it. They also spent money paying off guaranteed rate instead of paying off Soldier Field. So if you did something like there's a set amount of that property tax bill going to Soldier Field, and then Arlington Heights gets the growth above it, I think that's one of those win-win situations. This is really throwing stuff out there that's for conjecture. That's why I didn't put it in the paper. But you're going to have to do something about Soldier Field. So you make Pritzker happy by having that biggest property tax bill in the nation. You make the teachers happy because they're getting more property tax revenue than what they're getting now. The issue with the mega projects bill is the way it was written was you could take the taxes that they were going to receive from that stadium and spread it out over everybody else in that taxing body. That's going to have to be removed when a project like this comes to a community. You want it to be an opportunity for them to see lower taxes, not higher taxes. So that needs to be there. You probably, if you do those things, Republicans can be light on it. It'd be nice to throw a bone to the Republicans. If you want to talk about how I would be looking at this bill if I was still, and I'm representing, I used to represent Southwest Burbs. Plainfield was about half of the district, to give everybody an idea. One, I'd want it to be a good deal for the taxpayers in the state, but you can get all kinds of bones in order to get a vote. I was recently at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, and they actually have reasonable concessions. And even a commitment from the Bears for something like that would be the sort of thing that would push me towards maybe grabbing a vote from me. And if anybody hasn't been to that stadium, it's fantastic. I think it's way better than AT&T Stadium or even Las Vegas. But it's a couple bucks for a soda, and it's all you can drink. They give you a cup with a self serve. It's a couple bucks for a hot dog. $3-4 for ice cream. It's those small little things, I think, are the things that bring the public your way. And frankly, it certainly has given me goodwill about what I think about, the Atlanta Falcons and their ownership. I think it's short-sighted when you try to screw fans at every turn. So you have to do something for the Republicans, but maybe not a lot if you do those other things. You're going to have to do the infrastructure, which Governor Pritzker had said a lot of the infrastructure, like interchange improvements and stuff, was slated anyway. You do those things, it's a win for the stadium. As long as the Bears are paying for a world-class stadium, we should be rolling the red carpet out for them because it's going to do a lot for the state economically.
Just to put that in perspective, I bought 3 beers and a pretzel last night, and it was $63.
That's unreal. If you haven't done it, guys, Google Atlanta Falcons concessions prices. It's amazing. It makes me want to go back. So yeah, it's pretty cool what they do out there.
All right, I'm going to open the floor for you here. If you could correct one misconception Bears fans have about this whole stadium debate, what would it be?
Yeah, bailout for billionaires is still it, which I think is starting to change. Bailout for billionaires, and I think the Indiana thing is probably more real than most people want to think. But the fact that they want to pony up and pay for the entire stadium, I think, is a huge deal for all of us. And maybe they sold that too early and should have negotiated from a farther point and made it look like they were giving in. But that's the biggest one.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So,
right.
Finally, what should fans be watching over the next 6 to 12 months that signals either progress or failure?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to take 12 months. Session ends May 31st. So over the next 4.5 months really is what you're going to be watching. And you're going to be watching the discussions in Springfield. And it's going to be around that mega projects bill. And you'll see some negotiations. What tends to happen in Springfield with most big things is they happen really fast, and they often happen right before the end of session. So you'll see negotiations around it. The signs, we're already seeing the signs that something's going to get done. The signs that I'm seeing is the daily softening that you've seen from the governor and the speaker and other members of the General Assembly. That sign that they're moving, the publicity around it, that's a big deal. That tells you that I personally think we've turned it around and we're quickly moving towards a deal. I'm going to take a little bit of credit for that, for getting the story straight.
Please do. No, please do.
But yeah, I think once the public opinion changes around it like that, you're building towards something, and you find a way to get it done.
All right. Well, House Huddlers, please go to the comment section. I know that you guys have been in it, many times over the last year as we've been discussing this, whether it's here on the House Huddle or through my articles at Bear Goggles On, and now Mark's white paper, which again, the link will be in the description. So please go read that in its entirety. Let's keep pushing this out there. Let's help change the narrative, especially as fans, as Illinois residents. Let's help change that narrative. Because again, whether fans agree with every conclusion or not, this conversation adds something that's been missing, and that's the realism. We talked about how simplistic that opened the eyes of just wow, you could make them pay $14 million and they're still way ahead of that 8.8, and it still looks good for certain politicians, and yet it still helps the Bears and it keeps them here in Illinois. So again, that realism is there. And it's not just about the Chicago Bears, it's about how Illinois competes, how deals get done, what happens when politics and economics collide. Mark, we really appreciate you joining us today, walking us through the facts, the math, the political reality behind all this. Thank you for the insight, for being generous with your time. I'm going to open the floor to you here in just a minute to just whatever you want to, promote, publish, whatever you would like to do. That this is for your time.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. It's been awesome. I look forward to rewatching this episode or reliving it and watching further episodes. It's a shame we're going to be pivoting only to this and not the Seattle Seahawks, but there is next year. I'll say this: it feels a lot like 1984. You're not young enough to remember 1984. I was,
I was
and
one.
yeah, 1984 was the sensational season that was actually almost more memorable to me than the 85 season, because you saw the trajectory, you saw the change, and we finally won a playoff game after having not won one in a long time, and we fell a little short against the 49ers that year, but you saw the build. And frankly, if I was a free agent, I'd be wanting to come to the Bears. So I'm looking forward to this offseason for stadium purposes, but more importantly for team purposes.
Well, we appreciate that. House Huddlers, stay locked in. The story isn't going away anytime soon, and we'll keep breaking it down as it develops. Until next time, bear down and claws up.
It's after Packers always.